Chapter 15. Success. Section 1. Arthur and Mary had a very pleasant half-hour with Richard and his students, and the following evening they all had a meal together in a typical Athenian restaurant. The next day, feeling rather tired, they packed their bags again, went down to Piraeus, which is the port of Athens, and caught a boat for the island of Delos. They spent a few very agreeable days there, and then on their final Saturday went back to Athens, feeling completely refreshed and looking very suntanned. They went for a final look at the Acropolis before getting a flight back to England. On the Sunday, they drove down to Applefield to collect Simon, and on Monday morning at 9 o'clock, Arthur drove to his office car park, took his briefcase out of the boot, and made his way towards his office. Imagine his surprise when he saw that his name had been removed from his office door. Feeling rather puzzled, if not alarmed, he went in to find his secretary on the telephone, apparently talking to Sir John Robinson himself. When she put the phone down, he asked her why his name had been taken away. She ignored the question and told him that Sir John wanted to see him immediately. All kinds of thoughts passed through Arthur's mind as he made his way to the presence. However, Sir John greeted him very cordially, asked how his holiday had been, and then told him that he was to have lunch with him at 12 o'clock. Arthur somewhat shakily mentioned the disappearance of his name. Sir John said that he knew nothing about such matters, and that he'd better ask somebody else. In any case, he was already 5 minutes late for a meeting with the works manager. When Arthur got back to his office, he telephoned a few of his colleagues to ask them if they could solve the mystery. They all professed ignorance and seemed to show a complete lack of interest. So Arthur spent rather a worried morning.
Ah, there you are, Arthur. Help yourself to a drink.
Thanks.
Now, what I thought we'd do would be to go out for a change, for a meal and a chat. There's a little place just off the A11 with a very good chef. At least I think so. Do you like French food?
Yes, certainly.
Good. That's settled then. If you'll excuse me just a minute, I'll just send for my driver. But no need to rush your drink. We're not in any desperate hurry.
Yes, Sir John?
Tell Harry to bring the car round to the main entrance in about 20 minutes, would you?
Certainly, Sir John.
Well, Arthur, you're looking very fit. Your holiday must have done you a bit of good. I've been to Greece a couple of times myself. Long time ago, though. Last year we went to Mexico.
This seems a very nice place. I must have passed it 100 times without even noticing it.
Yes, it's not a bad little place, is it?
Would you like to order now, Sir John?
Yes, why not? What do you fancy to start off with, Arthur? I can recommend the mussels, if you like that sort of thing.
Yes, I love seafood. We had a lot of that in Greece.
Good. Then we'll both have the mussels. Now, what about the saddle of mutton? That's one of the chef's specialities.
Yes, that sounds fine.
Good. Now, let's have a look at the wine list. I think half a bottle of Muscadet, and we'll have this one here to follow. Okay?
Very good, Sir John.
Well now, Arthur, I expect you've been wondering what this is all about. I know I would have been. I think you've shown a remarkable degree of restraint.
Well, I must confess this morning has been rather confusing. It's not every day you get asked out to lunch by the chairman, completely out of the blue. And when I saw that my name had gone from the office door, I wondered if I got the sack. Is this, in fact, my farewell lunch?
Well, in a sense, yes. But on the other hand, no.
Oh, I can't honestly say that makes it all that much clearer.
Well, the fact of the matter is, old Charlie Hedges has just decided to retire from the board. It's his 70th birthday today, and he's having a little do tonight, but more on that later. Naturally, I've been sounding out my fellow directors about who should succeed him, and the consensus of opinion was that we should have somebody young, as the rest of us are getting a bit long in the tooth. So we cast our minds around and,
You don't mean... You're not trying to tell me... I've only been with the firm for about 5 minutes.
The fact is, Arthur, everybody's been so impressed by your recent activities in the Gulf that you seem the obvious choice. So, congratulations, Arthur. A seat on the board is yours if you want it.
Section 2. The passage is taken from Where Are They Now? A collection of articles by Patrick Egan about people who were famous some years ago. The story of Tommy Lawton, once reckoned to be the greatest centre-forward in the world, before they became known as strikers, must be one of the saddest in the history of soccer. He was born in the north of England in 1921, and when he hit the big time and revealed the stupendous talent he had, he became the most talked-of footballer in the country. Nowadays, his kind of ability brings £15,000 a year, thousands more in transfer percentages and goal, win and what have you bonuses. It brings villas in Spain, long holidays in the south of France, and a fortune from advertising and promotion franchises. But back in the 40s, things were not organized like that. When Tommy played for England, he was drawing a weekly wage of £17 from his club. For an England game, he received £20, with a £2 bonus if they won, and £1 if they drew. When he was in the side, the bonus for the team was £2, more often than it was £1 or nothing. Lawton, it was often said, and people were not exaggerating, could head a ball harder than many people could kick it. His bullet skull, with the centrally parted creamed black hair, had the happy knack of rendezvousing with the ball 8 feet off the ground with such precision that accuracy joined strength in an explosion of force which stung more than one goalkeeper's hands. He played for teams like Everton, Burnley, Notts County, Brentford and Chelsea, and was picked for England 23 times. During those 23 appearances, he scored 22 goals. That was striking. His clubs were happy too, for he netted a total of 231 times in 390 league games. Undoubtedly, a star with that potential in 1976 would be sunning himself for a couple of months in the year on some Barbados beach. But not Tommy Lawton or any other superstar in the 40s. Tommy played his last game for England in 1949, when he was 30. And 3 years later, this player, whose movement from club to club was marked by record transfer fees, was bought by Arsenal. Later, he went into football management and guided Kettering Town as player-manager to the Southern League Championship in his first season with them. Immediately after, he agreed to return to Notts County as manager, and today bitterly regrets that decision. "I should have stayed with Kettering for 3 or 4 years, learning my trade," he said. "At Arsenal, Tom Whittaker and Bob Wall gave me some tips and tried to help me, but I was too ambitious too soon. I thought I could do as a manager what I did as a player. In this game, you only find out when it's too late." Years later, he hit rock bottom and came close to suicide. "Despair," he said. "That was the only word for it. I was out of work and I had no money to speak of." I used to go out in the morning to make my neighbours and family think I had a job to go to. The only difference was that I used to sit in the market square or the library until it was time to go home. More than once it crossed my mind to walk into the Trent and end it all. Oral Practice 1. Practice saying these sentences from the dialogue.
Would you? In about 20 minutes, would you? To the main entrance, in about 20 minutes, would you? Bring the car round to the main entrance in about 20 minutes, would you? Tell Harry to bring the car round to the main entrance in about 20 minutes, would you? Is it? Not a bad little place, is it? Yes, it's not a bad little place, is it? Arthur. To start off with, Arthur. Fancy to start off with, Arthur. What do you fancy to start off with, Arthur? That sort of thing. If you like that sort of thing. The mussels, if you like that sort of thing. I can recommend the mussels, if you like that sort of thing.
Out of the blue. Completely out of the blue. Asked out to lunch by the chairman, completely out of the blue. You get asked out to lunch by the chairman, completely out of the blue. It's not every day you get asked out to lunch by the chairman, completely out of the blue.
Oral Practice 2. Listen to the dialogue and then take the part of A. I hear you got through your exam. Congratulations.
Thanks. Mind you, no one could have been more surprised than I was to hear that I'd passed.
Come on, you're just being modest. You've been working like a slave for ages.
Well, I did do a spot of work in the last 3 weeks or so, I must admit. But before that, I kept on putting it off. You know how it is.
Well, what are you going to do now? Have you got any jobs lined up?
I've applied for a couple, but I haven't had any replies yet.
You shouldn't have any trouble. I hear they're crying out for people with your sort of qualifications.
Well, I hope so. I've been a penniless student for long enough.
And you're broke now, I suppose. Now, wind the tape back to the beginning of this dialogue, and this time, speak at the same time as A. Remember that A speaks first. Now here's the dialogue again, and this time you take the part of A. Begin now.
Thanks. Mind you, no one could have been more surprised than I was to hear that I'd passed. Well, I I did do a spot of work in the last 3 weeks or so, I must admit. But before that, I kept on putting it off. You know how it is. I've applied for a couple, but I haven't had any replies yet. Well, I hope so. I've been a penniless student for long enough.
Oral Practice 3. Listen to the passage, which is about fairy stories, and then answer the questions in your book.
I suppose that I am not so different from most people, in so much as I was brought up on fairy stories as a child. At the time, I thoroughly enjoyed them, and used to ask my parents to repeat my favourite tales time and time again. But I often ask myself this question: are they really the kind of things that one should feed children with? The reason I ask this question is that they give the most distorted picture of the world that there could possibly be. Successful people, for example, are generally not those who give food to old ladies who turn out to be fairy princesses in disguise. Jack and the Beanstalk is an example of the sort of story I mean. Jack's mother, a poor widow, is down to her last penny and asks Jack to go to market to sell the cow. He's offered 5 beans, which he's told are magic. Now, is it a good idea to present to a child a hero who is so stupid as to sell a cow for 5 beans? I ask you. The really successful person in that story is the man who got the cow. There was once a man who lived in Bristol, I believe it was, who advertised that he had a certain system which he would share with anybody for a very small sum. This system would guarantee anybody who used it a fortune on the football pools. Hundreds of people sent him money, and he did very nicely, thank you. But if his system were so good, then surely he would have used it himself. Surely the most naive person in the world could have worked that out. I put this man's success down to fairy stories. Everybody wants the goose that lays the golden egg. He was cashing in on those poor people who, as a child, read Jack and the Beanstalk. Surely it would be a much better idea for parents to tell their children a fairy story that went something like this. Once upon a time there was a poor man who wanted to be rich. So he went to the shop and bought a newspaper, a writing pad, and a packet of envelopes. He went home and opened his newspaper and found out which horses were running at the local racetrack. On each of the sheets of paper from the writing pad, he wrote the name of a horse and put it in the envelope. Then he went down to the racetrack and started to tell people that he had been watching the horses earlier in the morning and had written down the name of the horse that had run faster than any other horse he had seen. He would sell them the name of that horse for £1. Within half an hour, he had sold all his envelopes. Eventually, he had enough money to advertise in the newspapers. He had the good sense to use a box number in the advertisements, because he didn't want people who hadn't won anything to come round to his house to complain, or worse. And eventually, he had enough money to buy a house in Monte Carlo, where he opened a casino, married a princess, and lived happily ever after. The only trouble with this kind of fairy story is that as a result, we would have a world full of potential tricksters and no gullible customers.
Oral Practice 4. Remember, used with the gerund. Listen to the examples first.
Did I lock the door?
Yes, I remember you locking it.
Yes, I remember you locking it.
I wonder if Peter posted that letter.
Yes, I remember him posting it.
Yes, I remember him posting it.
Now you go on in the same way.
Did I lock the door?
Yes, I remember you locking it.
I wonder if Peter posted that letter.
Yes, I remember him posting it.
I hope I turned the gas off.
Yes, I remember you turning it off.
Did I pay the phone bill?
Yes, I remember you paying it.
Did I answer his letter?
Yes, I remember you answering it.
Did Fred get the tickets?
Yes, I remember him getting them.
Barbara took the library books back, didn't she?
Yes, I remember her taking them.
Your parents told Bob the news, didn't they?
Yes, I remember them telling him.
That's the end of Oral Practice 4. Oral Practice 5. George and his wife seem to agree on everything. Listen to the examples.
George is anxious to get promotion.
And his wife's anxious for him to get promotion too.
And his wife's anxious for him to get promotion too.
George is quite willing to drive me home.
And his wife's quite willing for him to drive you home too.
And his wife's quite willing for him to drive you home too. Now you go on in the same way.
George is anxious to get promotion.
And his wife's anxious for him to get promotion too.
George is quite willing to drive me home.
And his wife's quite willing for him to drive you home too.
George is eager to get a new car.
And his wife's eager for him to get a new car too.
George is impatient to paint the house.
And his wife's impatient for him to paint the house too.
George is unwilling to change his job.
And his wife's unwilling for him to change his job too.
George is hoping to give up smoking.
And his wife's hoping for him to give up smoking too.
George is dying to become the boss.
And his wife's dying for him to become the boss too.
George is desperate to succeed.
And his wife's desperate for him to succeed too. That's the end of Oral Practice 5. Oral Practice 6. Agree with the first speaker. Listen to the examples first.
He brought me some flowers. How nice.
Yes, it was nice of him, wasn't it?
Yes, it was nice of him, wasn't it?
She ignored me. She is miserable.
Yes, it was miserable of her, wasn't it?
Yes, it was miserable of her, wasn't it?
Now, you do the same.
He brought me some flowers. How nice.
Yes, it was nice of him, wasn't it?
She ignored me. She is miserable.
Yes, it was miserable of her, wasn't it?
He invited me to dinner. How sweet.
Yes, it was sweet of him, wasn't it?
I think he was clever to do that.
Yes, it was clever of him, wasn't it?
And she was so stupid she forgot my name.
Yes, it was stupid of her, wasn't it?
Did you hear what she said about George? It was unforgivable.
Yes, it was unforgivable of her, wasn't it?
But he offered to drive me home. I think he was charming.
Yes, it was charming of him, wasn't it?
But she made some comment. I think she was absolutely bitchy.
Yes, it was bitchy of her, wasn't it?
That's the end of Oral Practice 6. Oral Practice 7. Dictation. First, cover up the passage and listen, please. One way of being successful is to be unsuccessful. This may sound a little strange, but it is nevertheless sometimes true. It very often happens that somebody does his job so badly that his superiors are desperate to get rid of him. When he applies for another job, which means promotion for him, he is given the best possible reference by his current employers. Having safely landed a higher position elsewhere, it takes but a short time for the new employer to be willing to praise him sufficiently to ensure yet another promotion. And so, eventually, he reaches the very top. Now you'll hear the passage again, and this time you must write down what you hear. One way of being successful is to be unsuccessful. This may sound a little strange, but it is nevertheless sometimes true. It very often happens that somebody does his job so badly that his superiors are desperate to get rid of him. When he applies for another job, which means promotion for him, he is given the best possible reference by his current employers. Having safely landed a higher position elsewhere, it takes but a short time for the new employer to be willing to praise him sufficiently to ensure yet another promotion. And so eventually he reaches the very top. Now here's the passage again. One way of being successful is to be unsuccessful. This may sound a little strange, but it is nevertheless sometimes true. It very often happens that somebody does his job so badly that his superiors are desperate to get rid of him. When he applies for another job, which means promotion for him, he is given the best possible reference by his current employers. Having safely landed a higher position elsewhere, it takes but a short time for the new employer to be willing to praise him sufficiently to ensure yet another promotion. And so, eventually, he reaches the very top. Now, check the dictation in your book. That's the end of Chapter 15.